You are listening to the Motherhood Unstressed podcast, and I'm your host, Liz Carlisle. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so glad that you're here, as always. And if this is the first time that you're tuning in, welcome. I'm so glad that you found the show and this particular episode because we were talking about how to talk to your kids about sex. Yes, the dreaded sex talk. And how soon is too soon? I think a lot of us think, well, when they're teenagers or, middle school, that's when you can have the conversation. But actually, experts in the field of sex education say that we should be talking to our kids about their bodies as soon as they can talk. But if you're like many parents, you're probably not having these conversations. In fact, a 2019 study stated that 63% of teen boys reported that their parents had never talked to them about contraception, and 44% of teen girls said the same. So it's clear that these conversations are not happening at the rate they probably should be to prepare and protect our kids. But that's okay, because that's why we're having this conversation, to bring it to the forefront, to raise more awareness about it so that we can facilitate these types of conversations. And it shouldn't be a scary thing. It's a great way to begin an ongoing conversation about relationships and body parts and boundaries, respect, privacy, and consent. So in this episode, I'm speaking with author and book editor Rachel Greener about her new book, Making a Baby. It's an unabashed and unapologetic portrayal of who we are, how we came to be, and how families are made. It answers the age-old question, where did I come from? And it answers all young readers' questions about their life in full detail, from contraception to birth, and how they were able to join their family. What I really enjoyed about the book is that it shows that there's more than one way to make a baby. There's more than one way to make a family. So it talks about in vitro fertilization, adoption, surrogacy, same-sex parents. It runs the gamut, but it does it in a way that's approachable. And even though there's a lot of detail in those pages, probably a lot more than you would expect, it does it in a way that meets your child where they are. So you can have it on the shelf next to all your other books. And then as they get older, they can go back to it and read the little bubbles, as we talk about, which have more explicit detail about what's going on physically. So I think this is a great book. I think this is a great change in our culture about being more open about talking about sex. And it's not to be explicit or flamboyant or in your face about it. It's really to prepare our kids so that when they do go out into the world, they're not going to be sidelined by something, and they're not going to be put in a situation where they feel like they can't speak up for themselves and say, hey, that's not okay. I'm not comfortable with that. And that, to me, is everything, especially with our young kids going out into a very fast-paced world, with social media and everything else. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy this episode. If you do, please share it with a friend, as always. And if you haven't already, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Enjoy. Hey guys, before we dive into this episode, I want to mention show sponsor RS COSO. Now, you all know I've talked about this for years on the show, that having a healthy gut biome is critical for beautiful skin, for a healthy life, just for overall mood and your immune system. I mean, it's huge in your life. Like 90% of your health is located in your gut. And so having a strong and healthy gut is absolutely paramount if you want to feel good and look your best. And that's where RS COSO comes in. COSO drink is a century-old traditional fermented drink made from more than 100 vegetables, fruits, and plants. It helps with gut health, weight loss, and even skin trouble. Now, I know that sounds too good to be true, but it's true. And with the American diet the way it is, we are bombarded with things from processed food like glyphosate, which is essentially an antibiotic, which kills your gut biome. So anything from Cheerios to chips, anything that's not organic pretty much has glyphosate in it. So you need to heal your gut if you're going to be eating that kind of food in daily life. And it's hard to just cut out all of that, I know from personal experience. So the benefits of COSO are pretty clear. It helps with gut health. It resets your immune system. It helps with skin trouble. It helps you lose weight. It helps detox your body and improve stress, mood, and sleeping patterns, which again goes back to the health of the gut. It reduces bloating and even improves constipation. So it's not cheap. It's $99 for a 3-day cleanse, but you get 25% off if you subscribe. And if you use my code UNSTRESSED, that'll give you an additional 10% off. So I've linked it in the show notes. If you're curious about trying it for yourself and getting your gut back into alignment, back to where it needs to be, head on over to rskoso.com. That's rskoso.com and use my code UNSTRESSED to save. Well, hello, Rachel. Welcome to the show. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Like we were talking about before, I love interviewing authors. There's always this mission, I think, behind, when they put out a book into the world. What was that for you? Why was a book on how babies are made and brought into the world? Why was that important for you?
So I don't know if you know this, but I'm also the publisher of the book. So I work under my maiden name, which is Rachel Kelleher, and I write under my married name, which is Rachel Greener. And while I was on maternity leave with my first child, who's now 4, I was invited for a job interview at Nosy Crow, which is the publisher of the book in the UK. And they are a really amazing independent publisher, really reactive, really driven creatively about what's important. It's about the content of the book. I mean, obviously they want to make money, they're a business, but that's not their primary motivator. And it was such a refreshing interview. And during my interview, I was asked to think about if there was any book on a subject that I felt was necessary but didn't exist, what was it? And having been on maternity leave, obviously, my brain was full of babies and how babies are made and sort of talking to lots of other people who were thinking about starting families in lots of different ways. So I started researching the books that were out there, some of which were around from when I was young, about how babies were made, to see how things had moved on. And I discovered things hadn't moved on quite as much as I thought. There are some amazing books out there which are really inclusive and beautiful. I think Corey Silverberg's What Makes a Baby, is it Corey Silverberg? That's his name? Yeah, is absolutely wonderful. But I felt like what I really wanted was a book that had clarity about how babies are actually made. It seems, we're all born and we all die, and yet birth and death are 2 of the greatest taboos in our lives. So I really wanted to create a book that wasn't just about mummies and daddies and wasn't, excluding people who have different birth stories, who've come to starting their families in different directions. I wanted a book that presented all of these ways on an equal footing, so that every child who reads a book about where babies come from can see their story reflected in this book. And so I pitched the book, I got the job, and I forgot all about it. And about 6 months later, my boss said, "When are we going to see your book about how babies are made?" And I'm not an expert, obviously. So I thought very hard about what I would like to see in a book, and I had a go at writing something. And we worked with a leading LGBT plus organisation in the UK, and we shared the draft text with them, and we got really great, really helpful feedback. We shared it with, I shared it with my friends, I shared it with teachers. We had a sort of focus group of people from all different kinds of backgrounds and family setups who were feeding into the content, because we really wanted to make sure that everyone who read it could find some reflection of their story in this book. And it was a trial and error process. And obviously we wanted it to be a book parents weren't afraid to have on the bookshelf along with their other children's stories. We wanted to kind of remove the taboos so that a child could just flick through it and relate to the things that were age appropriate for them. So that's why we pulled the kind of sciencey bits out into roundels, because as you'll know, as a parent, children, they kind of skip over stuff that's too complex for their understanding. So we tried to design a book that could be read on multiple levels. As an independent reader, you'll get a lot more out of it than you will as a very young child who's maybe just looking at some of the pictures. But there's still a route into talking about how families are made and different family setups, even for very young children, even if you don't wish to read the text with them, but you just want to let them talk about the pictures and see different people's bodies and talk about how we're the same or how we're different. And then we just made the book and put it out into the world. And we were really quite scared because no one else was doing, I don't think anyone else would have published this book apart from Nosy Crow, because it was such a challenge, and we knew we wouldn't be able to get it absolutely right for everyone. We knew that there were some people who would feel that we'd gone far too far in explaining, for example, as we do on the 4th spread, I think we have some people having sex.
I was going to get to that, but yes.
So that, we knew there might be some people who thought that we'd gone far too far, but then we also knew that there were other people that would think that we hadn't gone far enough and it wasn't quite inclusive enough. Because there are instances where we've tried to use non-gendered language throughout, but we have also very early on in the book broached the kind of physical nature of biological sex, because for children, we feel it's really important that they understand how we're the same, but how we're the different, and how that links through to biological sex, however you identify when you're older. There are 2 things that you need to make a baby. You need, well, 3 things really. You need a sperm, an egg, and a place for that baby to grow. And so we wanted to help children understand that link between their own biology and how babies are made.
Right.
But it was really challenging. It was a really challenging, everything was difficult. There were no easy decisions in this book.
Man, I can't imagine. Yeah, because you are getting input from so many different groups and people from different backgrounds and, even just different levels of comfortability who are contributing. How did you finally say, okay, I'm comfortable with this edition of the book? You were still feeling a little trepidation, how it would be received. But when did you finally feel like, okay, we've got it right. This is going to be good?
So our company, my company, Nosy Crow, is run by Kate Wilson, our CEO, and her husband is our financial director. And it's a bit like working for your parents. It's not at all like working for your parents, but if you imagine, and Adrian is, he's traveled the world. He's raised, amazing children. He sat there and he read the book from beginning to end after we'd done all of this work. And it was a bit like having, your dad read the book or something. It was like, but it was that moment when he read it and he was like, this is really, you've done it. You've managed to draw these things together. And I thought, I think we have, hopefully. And I know it won't quite work for everyone, but I hope that for the vast majority of people, they do find a route into it that allows them to kind of help build their confidence in talking about what is a really challenging subject.
Yes, because I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people who are in the middle school phase, parents and teachers and counselors and things like that. And by then it's far too late. You already have society and culture kind of invading your teens without the knowledge of what actually goes in to these biological processes and what bodies even look like until it's like all of a sudden on their phone. So I think it's so crucial that we do have books like this out into the world that candidly and clearly kind of spell it out for the kids. And like you said, you don't have to read every bubble, which goes in, to deeper stuff, but it's like, it gives you a base to really understand what goes on in our natural biology. I think that's huge.
I think one of the reasons that, especially in this day and age, more people are turning to books as a resource again, is because there is so much. There's a lot of great information online, but there's also a lot of misinformation. It's kind of the playground whispers that you heard when you were a kid, but magnified to 1,000,000. And it's really easy for kids to absorb things which just simply aren't true. I mean, I think of some of the things that I believed when I was a kid, but I just think it's so important for children to understand there's nothing wrong with talking about any part of your body. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with understanding where babies come from. We were all babies once, and all of us were birthed one way or another through a birth canal or in a C-section. It is part of the kind of rich tapestry of life. And I think by removing the taboo at a really early age, as children get older, they won't feel the same embarrassment that maybe we feel as parents, because it was more taboo when we were younger, even though, I think my parents, they bought me some books and they really did try and explain it. But, all those books, I looked at them again when I was writing this one, and they are there's a mummy and a daddy and there's a special.
And that's it.
I just think if you know exactly what happens, then you will never be surprised by it. And you will also understand, we've even tried to broach very gently ideas around consent and the fact that, also around the idea that people have sex in lots of different ways to show how much they care about each other. And that's not necessarily always penetrative sex. We're not going into any detail. We're just making it clear to children that this is just one of the many ways that people show that they care about each other. And it also happens to be one of the many ways in which you can make a baby if one person has a penis and one person has a vagina.
Yeah. And I think too, like it removes the shame. Like I grew up with a lot of like shame around sex and sexuality. Like you weren't supposed to talk about it. You weren't supposed to, think about it. Like it was just very, like you said, taboo. And so when you do kind of come into your own and you're out there, like I don't know. I just felt like a heavy cloud where there didn't need to be a heavy cloud. It's like you said, understanding what really goes on in the biological processes and understanding that that's good and natural. And, oh, by the way, there's a myriad of other things that can go into that. It's not just like you said, a man and a woman and all of that. But I also love that not only do you cover how babies are made, but also the labor process and the birth process, because I think as a society, we've gotten that one image of the woman careening down the hall in the wheelchair or on the gurney, and she's screaming her head off. And like, that's what we've given to our children to understand, like, this is what happens when you're in labor. Whereas, that's completely not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why was that important for you to have in there? Not just the making, but also the bringing them to the world.
I think, so many children are born through cesarean section these days. It just seemed mad that it's not something that is talked about and kind of explained to children from a really young age. I mean, in some countries, especially in the Far East, the majority of births are cesarean sections and they are planned and people know exactly what's going to happen. Whereas, you compare that to even in the UK, I think the statistic is something like at least a quarter of births are planned or emergency cesareans. So that's that's a lot, a lot of the world. And we chose to feature, so we've got some kind of scenes that look like they could be in a hospital, but we also chose to feature a home birth as the birthing scene, because in the UK that is also very common, and in a lot of other countries around the world. And there has been a sort of movement towards more midwife-led births, and sort of it's at the end of the day, we want to show the whole range. There's no right way to have a baby. You might be someone who has a minimal intervention birth at home. You might be someone that goes for that and ends up having a C-section in the hospital because it doesn't work out. It's a really complex and unexpected process. And I think even as an adult, even as, going into the process of having my first child, you don't know what to expect. You really don't, until you've done it once. And even then, what you experience is probably really unlike whatever you wrote on your birth plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then the second one can be totally different too. I thought my second labor would be a breeze after the first, and I did the water birth and all of that. And it was harder almost because I knew what was coming, and it felt even more painful. And so, it's always different. So to set expectations that you really shouldn't have too many expectations, I think is really freeing to a lot of people.
Yeah. And similarly, that was one of the reasons we also wanted to talk, or I personally wanted to talk about miscarriage. I feel it's something that has been, it is, again, I mean, it's something, it's a really, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it is something, again, like 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. And it's just, again, it's another of those social taboos. We just don't talk about it. And it's so important because it affects, just not just the person who's carrying the baby, but their family members. It's a big, the other children in the family who might have been excited about having a brother or a sister. And we felt like we wanted to acknowledge that in the least threatening way possible. So we, throughout the book, as you'll have noticed, we've tried to avoid any complex terminology and really bring it down to kind of really basic units. And so we don't talk about miscarriage in those terms or stillbirth. We sort of frame it as, why do some babies not grow? And just because sort of it's that whole, it's better to be prepared, I suppose. And one of the reasons, I work in children's publishing is we publish books to help children develop empathy and understanding by helping children put themselves in fiction, for example, in unfamiliar shoes. They then can have some knowledge of someone else's life experience. And in nonfiction, by presenting them scenarios which they're unfamiliar with, they again, it's kind of, you're learning that experience before you've actually had to experience it. So if something does happen, that's why we do books about death, for example. It's allowing you to kind of frame your experience without it being something that's terrifyingly new, because you're aware that these kind of things, they can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not happening to you. It's not something traumatic that your brain is going through. It's like, oh, this does exist and this happens every day in the world. And okay, I understand that now. And kids are so resilient. I feel like this is such a gift to give them, that this is the world. This is what we're dealing with. It's crazy to me that it's taken until 2021 for a book like this to exist in the world. And then you were still kind of like, oh God, like, how is this going to be received? Like, it's just maddening to me.
Yeah, but it is, it's just that it hadn't been done. And so it did, it did feel like a bold step, and we didn't know how it would be received. We didn't know if, when we took it to the, to the rights fairs, and we showed the American publishers and we showed the Spanish publishers, whether they would, just sort of go, very nice, interesting. But it's also, it has, I do think it is something of a, I don't know if you know the term Marmite. It's a sort of disgusting spread that we eat in England for toast.
I know Vegemite, but I've never heard of that one.
So Marmite is basically a sort of form of Vegemite. And when something is, you either love it or you hate it, we call it a Marmite or a Vegemite book, because people either love or hate Vegemite or Marmite. So the people that love this book really love this book, and they love this book because it speaks to something in their experience that they haven't had a chance to express before. So whether those are parents who've gone through IVF or surrogacy, or who used a donor or a sperm egg, or who are single parents, or who are adoptive parents, this book allows them to see their family experience on a level playing field. And for those people, it's a really important book. And that's one, and so those publishers said, this book speaks to me.
Yeah.
But there are, I'm sure, and we have had some much more conservative responses. And even if you sort of look at the reviews on Amazon, there are people who take pictures of the sex page and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you put this in a book for children. But it's a book. You don't have to show it to your children, or you don't have to talk to them in detail about what's happened. You can let them explore it at their own level. I've showed my 4-year-old making a baby many, many times. And when I show him the sex page, I say, what do you see? What do you think's happening here? And he says, the room is really messy. There are clothes all over the floor.
Right. That's his level at this moment in time. And that's totally appropriate. No,
and I said, it. Yes, they've had to take all their clothes off. They've decided
It's a mess.
Yeah. And, they've just thrown them on the floor.
Do you feel like the response is more open in Europe and not in America? Because, we're considered very conservative here. We've got the religious background, who, started the country. Like, do you feel like Europe is more open to a book like this, or are we coming around? Are we all kind of on an equal playing field these days? I
mean, the US publishers have been really, really supportive of this title. And I do think it speaks to a lot of people. I think even for people who might not want to show it to younger children, I think they can see the value in it, even if they might think, I don't want to show this to my 7-year-old. They're not ready for this. They might think, but when they're 10, I still, because at the end of the day, we do live in a world where children, they get their first mobile phone at what age? Like 10, maybe younger. They are exposed to a lot of information online. And I think everyone knows deep down that it's really, that knowledge is power, and that if you are informed, then you are safer, because you know how to talk about your body and you know what's appropriate for your body. And you're just in a better position to kind of know your rights, I suppose, and know what to expect from the world. So when you encounter things which are not like your own family situation, you won't be surprised and think, oh my goodness, I've never come across a situation where somebody just has a dad and no mum, or,
Right. I feel like it removes the otherness, from a situation. We're all in this human family on earth, and it's all going to be different, and it's all going to be, everyone's going to have their own path and their own life experience. But yeah, to introduce it at an early age before the phone comes in and kind of takes over, I feel like it's an important thing for a parent to do for their child, no matter what age they are. You find the right level for them. What was it about you that brought you to this book, to this job, to this publishing company? There's something about you, like the way you grew up. I don't know, what is it? Have you always been kind of an avant-garde force of good in the world?
No, I don't think so. I've worked in publishing for about 12 years in book publishing, and I've done nonfiction, I've done fiction. Before that, I worked as a music journalist, and I, went to a lot of bars, and I stuck to a lot of sticky floors, and I watched a lot of terrible bands. And, but I think for me, just even, as a music journalist, or, when I was working in fiction, it's about connection with the world, isn't it? It's about helping people connect and learn and empathize with others. So music brings connection to the world. Fiction, as I was talking about earlier with empathy, that brings connection to the world. And nonfiction, I feel, we're really helping children to engage with everything from their own biology to understanding, space, or our place in history, our place in the world. I just think I just love communicating ideas. I suppose that's what I've always been passionate about.
I love that. And is that your hope for this book? Like, what do you ultimately want this book, its legacy, to leave with the world?
I just hope that a lot more children grow up not feeling the taboos and the sort of shame that I felt, and the embarrassment I still feel, because I still do feel it when I'm trying to talk to my children. Obviously my 20-month-old doesn't care, but my 5-year-old, or he's 4, nearly 5, he's getting to that age where he's starting to ask questions. And I'm really glad I've got this resource that I've created, because I can share that with him and try and let go of that embarrassment that I think we've all carried with us, people of an older generation, because we don't need to.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Okay, so last question. With everything that you have studied and researched and everything that you intuitively know, what's something that you want the audience to remember from this talk?
That every story is different, and you can never, I can't think of the right phrase, you can never presume that you know.
I love that. Okay, so where can the audience find the book online and find out more about you and the publishing house?
So they can find out, so in America, it is published by Penguin, the Dial for Young Readers. And so you can go to their website to find out more about the American edition, and to find out more about Nosy Crow, who are the UK publisher. We've got a website, which is www.nosycrow.com. And you can find out, I've got a biography up there, and you can see some of the other interesting nonfiction that we're putting into the world.
Beautiful. I can't wait to see what else you're bringing out. I think it's going to, if it's anything like this, I can't wait, honestly. The book is Making a Baby, an inclusive guide to how every family begins. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your truth with the audience. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thanks again to our sponsor, Koso Drink. Be sure to head on over to rskoso.com, that's rskoso.com, and use my code UNSTRESSED to save. You have been listening to the Motherhood Unstressed podcast. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast.